Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show we're talking about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary, and a lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Very interestingly enough, a person from Sherlock and Watson's past, and apparently with the time frame they've given us, because Sherlock is like, oh yeah, this has 4 years ago, and it's like, okay, so this is a season 3 case. Essentially, someone from the past, Mina, or rather Cassie, shows up. Interestingly enough, I lost my mind because I saw the preview, and I was like, because obviously they're referencing an older episode, I was like, oh my god, that's the actress who played Tilda in Into the Badlands, which is interesting because I recently saw the actress, I'm blanking on her name, I learned it and then I forgot and I feel so bad about it, but the actress who played Chow in Into the Badlands, she was in the first episode of the Star show, The Rook, so it's just interesting timing and stuff like that, but I was like, it's actually plays Tilda, that's so cool. I completely don't remember that case at all. It's like, it always kills me when shows, not in a bad way, it's just always interesting because, once again, I always talk about this, there are very, I probably could count on one hand, well, not one hand, but it's certain circumstances that lead me to rewatching a show, rewatching previous seasons. I've seen every season of Elementary once all the way through, so that's kind of a common thing about most shows, but nevertheless, once again, whole tangent. So I didn't remember the case at all, but I got a lot of the details from them kind of rehashing stuff. But essentially, she came to Sherlock and Watson because, one of her foster parents, a lady named Hannah, who had looked after her at one point in time, ended up getting killed. And it's like, oh, she was someone I cared about. So I want you guys to look into the investigation for me. And I love Sherlock just not believe. He's like, oh yeah, so-and-so. She's like, why are you so mean? He's like, because I haven't believed a word that's come out. Oh, what was it? It's like, right, here's an orange. It'll keep your mouth, occupied long enough so you'll have to keep lying. She's like, why are you so mean? He's like, because I believe you've been lying since, I haven't believed the word that came out your mouth since hello. It's like, geez. And it's like, when you look at everything, it's like, yeah, she seems like a pathological liar. So not only are they trying to solve Hannah's case, they're also solving another case at the same time. I'm like, what the hell is Cassie up to? It's like, she's got to have some ulterior motive and stuff like that. Technically, to a certain extent, you're almost solving 3 cases because basically Cassie got released because the FBI agent she was accused of potentially killing, it turns out she didn't actually kill that FBI agent. Someone else had confessed to it, but then Sherlock and them were still kind of like, yeah, you might have been associated with that situation. So it's kind of a thing of like, okay, we're trying to find out what she's doing while helping solve this case because they think this whole case is just a front. Especially because when they meet Hannah's husband Joe, it's like, oh, he didn't actually know Cassie because Hannah and Joe were married after Cassie had already left, and it's just like, oh yeah, there's no paperwork and stuff like that. It just me and Hannah ran into each other, and she decided to take me in, and it's like, yeah, because she just conveniently puts herself in a position where it's like, oh yeah, there's no one to kind of go against what she said, so that was kind of a fascinating thing. But I also do I kind of got this feeling throughout the episode. I'm like, oh, it's almost kind of like Sherlock's got a little protege to a certain extent because he's taking her along with cases. More so it's just so he can keep an eye on her, make sure she ain't up to no shady stuff. But it's because this case involves baby formula in particular because she worked for this company called Formula Share, Hannah did. And now it's this whole thing of we end up finding out that basically this company was under watch by cops because there was a belief that it was kind of a organized crime thing of them stealing and selling baby formula, which is whoa. You kind of hear about that once again, the kind of parallels to real life, that being a thing. People, I remember some stuff a while back about I think in Australia, people were snatching up baby formula like it was nobody else's business. Because I think in certain countries, because the baby formula situation is a little complicated, because some of the baby formula might be tainted and stuff like that. I forgot. I'm not going to say where it was. It was somewhere in Asia, if I remember correctly. Like I said, it was something I remember hearing about years ago, so I don't know if it's necessarily the same thing nowadays. Once again, I'm going on a huge tangent, so I do apologize, but nevertheless. So I do like that they kind of bounce back and forth a little responsibility. Hey, Charlotte's looking after her now. Even the whole situation of the whole, the NYPD is going to work with these other, cops in this joint task force to kind of take this whole situation down. And so Sherlock and, Cassie get into talking and stuff like that. And she's like, oh, I like how dangerous you think I am. Even under these circumstances, you're trying to pretend like you're on the up and up, but you're so having fun with it. You're smiling and stuff like that, being like, oh, how dangerous I am. And Sherlock, because Sherlock wants to understand what she's up to. Like, she has to have some ulterior motive that she couldn't have cared about Hannah. But then, you know, she says the whole thing of like, the fact of the matter is, I know what you probably grew up in. You grew up in a mansion, you had servants, you were never alone. But for me, it's like, hey, you find that one connection. I connected with Hannah, so it meant something to me. But that's something you would not be able to understand. Eventually, she spent time with Joan, and then Joan, she's looking at her, she's like looking like Cassie's looking around the room, and it's like, what are you doing? She's like, what's wrong? It's like, no, nothing, it's just I'm usually on the other side of the window, so it's kind of interesting to be on this side. And that makes you go like, obviously you had no personal connection to Hannah, because the person who potentially could have killed her is right there in front of you. You'd be more focused on that than like what's going on in this room. And it's like, okay, you want to know the real reason I'm here? Blah 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 blah. She starts setting up her story. I'm like, you're gonna say that Sherlock's your dad or something. I thought the interesting thing was gonna be like, oh, you're gonna maybe find out like it's like, oh, or maybe it's like, are you gonna try and suggest that Moreland is your dad and Sherlock is actually your brother or something like that? I thought that was gonna be the twist too. But then she goes like, but then Joe's like, you're saying that Sherlock's your dad, and she's like, yeah. And then she's like, yeah, right, good try. You see her kind of smile like, I had to go for it. I'm like, yeah, that's total bullshit. But then part of my brain was like, you don't think on some level there was some truth? It's like, no, because we've heard some of the things about Sherlock's, you know, we know how Sherlock operates. I mean, I think probably throughout his entire life, he's probably only been in a handful of relationships. I think all of those might have been in the context of the show, obviously one of them kind of existing outside of the show. But we just, like, you know, you don't really see that potentially happening, him having a kid. I mean, maybe it is. I mean, it's not impossible. It just, you know, Joan kind of saw right through it and whatnot. But you do see that Cassie does help with the case, because she's like, whoa, this lady, Meredith, she couldn't have been the killer. She's got to be innocent, because the fact of the matter is she looked into, like, the fact is that she was going to buy this gift. It's kind of like one of those kind of like, I guess kind of like sexy, kind of like, ooh, like adult type of books of like, oh yeah, shirtless men, that type of kind of like, maybe like some 50 Shades of Grey type of book, I'm assuming is kind of what they were getting at. And the fact is that Cassie's like, if you were going to kill somebody, you'd want to give them and you were trying to fake like, oh, I got this gift for them and stuff like that. You'd get a gift that you know everyone would know, like, oh yeah, she totally loved it, so it's a sensible gift that would kind of make everyone be like, oh yeah. But you wouldn't give that person a gift that they themselves would hide, because Cassie's like, yeah, I went, yes, before you say anything, yes, I went through Joe's place and I was looking around. That's beside the point. The fact of the matter is she had those type of books that Meredith described, but she had hidden them away. So I thought that was kind of pretty neat in that regard. But the real thing that kind of got me about the whole situation was the conversation between Sherlock and Cassie, because essentially Sherlock had discovered the fact that Cassie was looking into all these different cases, murder cases, specifically ones that kind of existed close enough but just enough outside the NYPD purview, that basically it was a situation that we thought we were like means to an end to get to her end goal, but we ourselves are the end goal. And it turns out the reason why is because Sherlock pointed out, he's like, all that time ago when we met, you know, what you said the other day, there was truth to that about connections. You found it, like, I saw what kind of person you were, that basically you were not like other people. But when I was recognizing that about you, you were also recognizing that about me. So there was kind of a bit of a kindred spirit type of thing going on there of like, we're kind of alone in this world. He's like, even correct. So it's like, yeah, my mom died when I was young. My dad, which we as the audience know, has a very, very complicated relationship with his dad. He was kind of always alone, and that kind of always stuck. But she's like, well, you have Joan and you have like Belle and Gregson, but he's like, yeah, but that's a new development, which we know that's only been a couple years. So, but most of his life he always stayed alone, just because he was kind of that outsider. And he's like, look, like, I will always give them the credit for the fact is that they are the foundation of what I've built here. But at the same time, I kind of inadvertently created that situation myself when I created my own job, and that is consulting detective. That led to everything being what it is right now. So it all started with him creating this job. He created a circumstance that gave him a means to do good, to contribute to the world by taking what made him different and bring a little good and a little bit of difference to the world, you know? And he's basically saying that Cassie could take and do the same thing, you know? It's like, oh, you're saying I should be like a consulting detective? It's like, no, that was my answer. You just have to go out and find your own answer to it. But Cassie is very observant and stuff like that, because obviously she's very good at picking up on people being lied. That's even something Sherlock had said. He was like, oh yeah, because like she was like, oh yeah, I could tell that you obviously didn't tell Joe everything that was on your mind when you discovered those emails. And it's like, well, yeah, you know, liars are very good at picking up when other people are telling lies. And she's like, thank you. But nevertheless, also when they were examining like Lehoven's like the store and all that, like its security footage, just like, oh yeah, she points out a guy. It's like, oh yeah, you should be probably checking out this guy because he didn't steal anything. But the fact is, he keeps checking the same cereal, but he's just moving to a different box and whatnot. So it's like, yeah, he's just waiting for the aisle to get cleared and whatnot. So. But it turns out, in the grand scheme of everything, that what this whole case it's really about is about. Essentially, there was a Senate bill going through that was going to make it so, because obviously, like baby formula is a very because I was about to say breast milk. Baby formula is a very expensive thing, sadly, but there's vouchers that kind of make it so that like people who, even if you can't afford it, you can still get it. But there's a whole Senate bill about the whole debate about the whole situation, and that's what this is about, because very rich people make their money off the fact is that baby formula is very expensive. In particular, it turns out the dude who, Lehoven himself, is kind of a part of that. So, you know, it's interesting because obviously, like, Joan is kind of like, oh man, you and Cassie actually make a good team. And even Sherlock is like, hey, the fact of the matter is, you know, I really like, you know, Cassie. Like, the fact is that, like, hey, there's something there that, because there's the whole conversation obviously this season about the whole Odin situation, about preventative measures to make sure people don't do bad things. It's like, well, it turns out in the long run, it's like, well, Sherlock's thinking like, well, now I'm kind of doing that, but I'm applying it a different way. His method is kill those people, you know, but now it's like, hey, I can take Cassie and potentially take her down a different path, and maybe she would have gone down a darker, more sinister path potentially, like she has before. You get the whole conversation, you know, depending on whether she really did all those terrible things in the past or not. That's actually kind of an interesting conversation, because Joan, kind of circling back to it, Joan had brought up earlier, she was like, you actually like Cassie, don't you? He's like, well, yes, because of the fact that he's like, because despite all the bad things she's done, you like her. And Charlotte was like, yeah, the fact of the matter is, you know, singular, intelligent people like that, of course, you know, you just hope they kind of don't go down the wrong path. And it was like, oh, that's what Joan was kind of alluding to, like, oh, you don't want her to turn out like someone else. And I was like, is she referencing Moriarty? And he quickly answers by being like, she's no Moriarty. And then Joan was like, yeah, which is like, that's so interesting to think about. Like, yeah, I guess what he sees in her, he sees within himself and kind of saw in Moriarty. And I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing. But then you see, like, you're like, oh no, because she's going bad because she's like blackmailing Lehoven. It's like, oh, you're $2 million. But I was like, oh man, that sucks. But the moment she sneaks back in, it's almost like a teenager sneaking out of her parents' house, and she goes back in and Sherlock's waiting there, and he's like, oh yeah, essentially you're the serpent who I should have known better, but I didn't see you for who you really were. I was willing to give you a chance, but I should have listened to myself to not trust you. But it's like, hey, no, you were right about Lehoven. Obviously he didn't pull the trigger to himself, but hey, he said I've set it up, so aren't you very curious to find out like who's going to be there to try? Because I made myself a target, because I made myself a loose end of like, oh, potentially I could be blabbing my mouth about this. So it's like, okay, he's going to need to take care of me. And lo and behold, who shows up? One of the detectives solving the case. It's like working on the case. It's like, oh, okay, so, and he's even willing to turn against Lehoven with all of this. And I love when it's all said and done, you have Gregson be like, does that mean that Cassie's a good guy now? And even Jonah's like, honestly, I don't know. You know, because Cassie is such an enigma. But I did like the moment she has with Sherlock at the end, where it's kind of the whole conversation about, like, obviously, like, she dropped out of one of her AP classes because for her, it's like, I already knew what was all the class could really teach me. She's super smart. And so she was like, I'm just going to sign up and take the test on its own. But I guess like Sherlock has a thing with her now where it's like, oh, I'll come and check on you once in a while. And you know, it's this beautiful thing of like him being like, oh, I got this. You know, I looked into the whole thing about your parents so you can find out your real last name. And she was like, honestly, I kind of don't want to know, because for her, it's like, if I find like, you know, because finding out the truth, you know, that's not the easiest thing to handle, like knowing why your parents potentially left, because it's like, once you know it, you can never unknow it, and it's just going to sit with you. So she's like, I'd rather not know. Sherlock's like, I kind kind of figured as much. As being as smart as she is, if she wanted to find out, she could have easily done it herself. But there's like the fact that she didn't ever do it means she doesn't really want to know. It's actually a application that lets her change her name. It's like, because at the end of the day, your past doesn't define you, so it doesn't decide who you end up being. You can change your name. You yourself can decide who you want to be. And she's like, you want to sit down and kind of shoot off some names? And they do. And I'm like, Sherlock's got like a protege, kind of like a bestie in a sense, a new friend at the very least, because someone else who was a little different. I wish we could get a little more with that. We probably won't for the rest of the season. Like, we only got like, once again, kind of similar to the iZombie thing, there's only like a handful of episodes left for this, so it's kind of sad. But I would love to see like more of this dynamic potentially grow. But it's nice to see it kind of here, but I would love to see more with it. I think it'd be pretty neat. I mean, to be fair, he already kind of has a protege, because I'm forgetting, it's like, right, because he even makes a point of being like, yeah, when he started, he was the only consultant detective, but obviously that wheelhouse has expanded since he created the job, because obviously it includes Kitty, who was his protege for a while and is off doing her own thing as well, so it's just, I guess it's rather than a protege, it's more like a friend. But I think he can apply a lot of his own stuff to Cassie to kind of help her with her situation, or just kind of, the connection that they made with each other. And I thought it was kind of just like this beautiful thing of like, yeah, we're different, and we can understand that because we are both different. We can recognize each other being different to everyone else. So I just thought that was kind of a nice way to kind of wrap up the case and everything. And it's interesting to find out, Cassie tried to defend her, like, why are you so mean? Why can't? But it's like, I mean, I guess what she was also saying wasn't 100% untrue. Like, yes, the whole thing about Sherlock being her dad, sure. But the fact is, Sherlock was kind of the reason why she came into their lives, because it's like, because she made a connection with him back then. So I kind of wanted to rewatch that episode now and just kind of add the context of this episode now with that. I mean, to be fair, once again, that was like 4 years ago, as they were saying, so, but still, it's just kind of interesting. At one point in time, I need to go back and just rewatch certain shows. Even shows I've seen like every season and episode, but I still need to go to this, especially to kind of get the entire package, especially this show. But nevertheless, that was just something floating in the back of my mind. Nevertheless, I am very interested to see where all this ultimately takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.